Okay, let me bring in here, and I apologise to him ahead of the chat for having to drop the interview yesterday because of immediate events. But Sam Mazur is the bloke who has lodged a complaint, effectively, against a couple of Hobart pastors. One of whom's a street preacher, and the other one is, I guess, probably what would you call him, an actual church preacher. So it's the Hobart Cornerstone Church, David G, right, and the pastor Campbell Markham. Now, David's largely an Elizabeth Maul preacher in Hobart, one of the street guys who sort of yells at people as they walk past, you know that. And Sam has made a complaint which has been accepted by the state's Anti-Discrimination Commissioner on the basis that he just thinks that they're shouty and offensive. And I have some sympathy for his position, for what it's worth. It's also worth pointing out that the two preachers have filed a Supreme Court application to try and strike out the complaint by Sam on the grounds that the state's Anti-Discrimination Act is unconstitutional. Good luck with that. Let me bring in here Sam Mazur. Sam, good morning. How are you and welcome?
Good morning, Brian. How are you doing?
I'm very well, very well. Tell me, how ugly did the behaviour get to prompt you to make the complaint you have?
Oh, thank you for asking that first. I got to say, it's pretty outrageous out there in general. It gets quite ugly on a regular basis for the last 4 to 5 years, I'd say. And I got to say, I've been involved in a lot of these public debates and discussions myself, but yeah, this is definitely a public issue when it comes to how ugly it gets out there. I've come across the situation and it's been pretty extreme once or twice.
Yeah, and obviously being a public communicator for many decades, Sam, I'm hyper-conscious of the words that are used to describe all sorts of things and the offence that might be taken by some people listening, and also the laws under which I operate, which are far more restrictive than the laws that would apply to these street preachers. Look, again, let me clarify here. It's not so much the actual proselytizing that bothers you so much as the aggro that goes with it, the language that's used, the subjects that are commented on. Which is it predominantly for you?
Oh, it really does cover a wide range of issues. Okay. I mean, to call it simply street preaching, I think would be generous to describe the behavior that goes on out there, let alone the language and the subject matter. I mean, for example, the subject material can be extremely offensive, which goes without saying. With a lot of people have very strong views on a lot of different things that can, of course, offend a lot of people.
Sure.
But I believe that. Well, I mean, one way to put it would be I don't believe that there's really many people who stop and listen in general, unless there's a rather ugly, public, loud debate that goes along with it. And, of course, all sorts of things can get brought up in those sort of...
Yeah, it's kind of the car crash syndrome, isn't it, Sam, in a very real sense? If they're just quietly talking, nobody will pay any attention to them. But if they get a bit of a crowd and it gets a bit ugly and there are insults being hurled around, they'll get a bigger crowd, which from their point of view is a good thing.
Absolutely, and that draws in a lot of attention, and I think as well that the people who walk past and engage in these sort of discussions, if you want to call them that, I think they're a lot less prepared for what is going to happen next, what usually follows, with the amount of adrenaline that comes along with these sorts of things. A veteran in that sort of area can be a lot more used to what comes next, and of course I'm describing the preacher himself here.
Yeah, I understand. Okay, what would to your way of thinking, Sam? What would be a successful outcome for you in terms? I mean, do we fine them? Do we prevent them from doing what they're doing in the places they're doing it? What do you think would be a satisfactory outcome from your point of view?
Oh well, I've actually heard. I've heard a few things being tossed around in the media in the last, few weeks in general. Fears about being fined or some kind of re-education training, of course, and these sorts of things. And people are concerned that they'll have to remove posts they've made online. And I've never requested or suggested any of those sort of things at any time. I've never been interested in seeing anyone fined or prevented from being able to express their own views within their church. And I mean, honestly, there are probably limits to what people can express in a church when it comes across to things.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Dangerous practices.
Yeah, Sam, it's interesting you use that qualifier. I'll just pick up there what they say in their church. So you would accept largely any piece of doctrine that appears in biblical or other scriptures, etc., to be talked about, spoken about, argued in a pastoral situation, in a church situation, but those same messages, when translated to the street in public, not acceptable? Would that be have I defined your position correctly there?
Well, I'd say they're definitely likely to create a public, some kind of, very likely to instigate some kind of public disturbance in some way. As we've seen in the recent debate regarding the plebiscite, a lot of the rather outrageous claims regarding things like pedophile marriage or the stolen generation being equated to marriage equality between same-sex couples. I'm familiar that these are topics that are generally spoken about quite often in some church environments, and we're seeing a lot of this stuff spill out into the public eye at the moment. And these are the sorts of things we can expect to see in some of these public, debates, once again, if you want to call them that.
Okay. The preachers have indicated to me, at least one of them has, I spoke to Campbell Markham on the radio, and he his fear is that his freedom of speech will be impinged by any decision made by the state's Anti-Discrimination Commissioner. You would obviously not agree with that.
Well, no, I genuinely understand his concerns,
okay.
But I feel at the same time, if we were to look at this as a business or an organization that's operating as a business, and an employee is behaving in a way that's causing problems or potentially causing problems or potentially breaching the Anti-Discrimination Act, it's the responsibility of the employer to be keeping an eye on that kind of behavior. And in that sense, that is the reason I've included those sorts of messages spoken about or blog posts.
Okay.
For example, the sermon they talk about how I've included in my complaint is specifically talking about the preacher, Mr. G, using the term ambushing to describe what he does in town as ambushing people, as in they can't help but say something and he ambushes them. He quotes a part of scripture that describes how Jesus ambushed people on the one day of the week they thought they can get some peace. That kind of language and that attitude, I believe, is pretty indicative. And that's the reason I included a sermon. It wasn't because I was saying they shouldn't be saying this stuff in church. That was simply to show, it was very much, they mentioned myself and they mentioned interactions with other people. I believe they had a chuckle after one mention involving me. I heard, a few people in the church had a bit of a collective.
So you'd see a win as what? Not people not shouting stuff at you as you're walking around in public, no matter what they're shouting about. Would that be, again, a reasonable summation?
Well, I'd say that the location of the current and the current rules regarding the area basically allow for these very aggressive public speeches, and the location doesn't just necessarily affect people walking past. Some of the businesses in the area have very little choice. People often say you can always just walk away.
Yeah, no,
everyone actually gets that option.
Yeah. Sam, I have similar complaints from businesses in Launceston when similar things happen in the Brisbane Street Mall. Precisely the same kind of response from many of the businesses. They just hate it. Okay, look, I suppose you'd be disappointed if it was determined that the application you've made to the Anti-Discrimination Commission here in Tasmania, that the law or the law under which it operates would be found unconstitutional. Thereby, the complaint collapses, doesn't it? Ultimately, well, it's unlikely, though. I would have thought.
Well, there's a genuine concern, and I'd like to say that I am completely confident that there will be no problems moving ahead. There, of course, this is a very day-by-day, week-by-week process. Clearly. All sorts of things seem to crop up all the time.
Okay. All right.
Sorry, pardon, you go.
No, I was just going to say, Sam, I'll be very interested to see how this plays out. Has there been any date set for that Supreme Court application hearing?
I understand that'll be on the 5th of September, if that does go forward.
5 September, so that's not too far away now, only next week.
No,
okay. All right.
It's actually getting quite close. I'm getting a little nervous.
Okay, we'll keep an eye on it. Appreciate your time, Sam, and I really apologise for messing you around yesterday, mate. Many apologies.
That's no worries, Brian. And can I just make one last quick comment?
Yeah, of course.
I just wanted to say to the Christian community, I really hope that no one's getting the impression that there's some kind of war on them in general, because I understand that there's a lot of different opinions within the community. I've spoken to some lovely Christian people. They understand that I don't have a problem against them at all. This is about, and they don't also agree with the kind of behaviour that goes on the CBD.
Yeah, look, trying to spread the word's one thing. Doing so by monstering, harassing, and generally screaming at people is usually not the best way to go about it anyway. Sam, appreciate it. Thank you, mate. We'll stay in touch.
Yeah, thank you very much, Brian.
Thank you. Sam Mazur, who's who lodged the anti-discrimination complaint against Hobart Presbyterian pastor Campbell Markham. And street evangelist, as he's known, David G. We spoke to Campbell Markham a week or two ago on this, as you may be aware. Okay, interesting. We'll watch how that plays out. September 5 for the hearing to determine whether the state's anti-discrimination laws are in fact constitutional.